I'd like to start this off by asking all of you a question. How many people here would consider themselves media literate? And if you're watching the live stream, you can put your comments in the live stream. Okay, thank you. Now, we're gonna do a little bit of a test. But I'm gonna throw this to my panelists, and in 140 characters or less, to give us kind of your log line, the description of what it means to be media literate. Elle, you want to lead us off?
What it means to be media literate, I think that means understanding the sources that you get your information from and how to cross-reference them, and how to be able to weigh which one has more authority and which ones you should be skeptical of, and when you should be questioning those big mainstream authoritative sources.
Micah, want to jump in?
Sure, yeah, I agree with that, of course. I guess I'd also add the ability to distinguish between commentary, original reporting, and just some basic understanding about how journalism is made, the practice and ethics.
This is your bread and butter, Michelle. You're the educator here.
I feel like I'm at an advantage on this question. Sorry. So since I run a media literacy organization, I better know the answer to this question. So the way that we actually define media literacy is the ability to access, analyze, evaluate, create, and act using all forms of communication. So the way that we think about it is it's an expanded definition of literacy. So what does it mean to be a literate person in today's world? You have to be able to read and author, consume, and create using all forms of communication. And one thing that isn't always understood about media literacy is that it's beyond just news, right? That's all kinds of media that we consume, everything from commentary to opinion to entertainment, and we should be thinking about all of it.
I mean, I am not nearly as qualified as you to talk about this, but I do think a big part of media literacy is knowing your own biases and then also recognizing your sources or entertainment or whatever you're consuming, their biases, and being able to just recognize our own fallibility and where we stand on issues. Because if you're pretending that everything is the same, it's not.
Okay, now I'm going to ask you all again, you astute consumers of media. How many people think they're media literate now, given the definition from these experts? Do we have more hands? Less? A little more. Okay. All right. We're making progress here. Great. Michelle, I want to start with you. What do you see as the biggest obstacles we have to assess, to really analyzing, evaluating, creating, and acting, to using all these forms of communication? What are the obstacles there for folks?
So I think the first thing to recognize is that over the past 2 decades, human communication has changed drastically, right? We went from a consumer type of, top-up experience as a consumer, and now we're all participating in this crazy media landscape. So there's been huge changes to the way that we consume and create information. But the 2 biggest consequences or results of that is the speed at which we get information and the amount of information. So both of those are unprecedented. The amount of information that we are trying to consume every single day is unprecedented, and the speed in which it gets to us is unprecedented. So those are enormous challenges to understand how do we process all of it, how do we know where to go for the best, most, highest quality information, and this is one of the reasons why media literacy education is so important, because how would we know how to do that unless we're learning the skills that we need to learn?
Elle, by the way, shameless plug here.
Yeah.
Ellie's book, Black Pill, here. Go out, buy it. How I Witnessed the Darkest Corners of the Internet Come to Life, Poison Society and Capture American Politics. It's wonderful. I read it over the weekend. Maybe don't read it before bedtime. One of the things I was so excited about this panel is that 3 of you have all kind of really gotten up close and personal, quite frankly, with a lot of the disinformation, covering the alt-right, which this book does a brilliant job of, and congratulations. And I'm just, I guess what I'm saying is, what do you see as, you've given a lot of coverage to these folks out there spreading a lot of disinformation. How do we traverse that? How do we put daylight on it and combat it?
Well, I think the most important thing is to not assume that if we ignore it, it goes away, because it doesn't. There are many internet platforms now, so if the New York Times and CNN never ever spoke of these people, they still would be able to reach millions instantly, and they do. What is really dangerous that I've observed over and over and over again is essentially the group chat, which we can all be susceptible to. It's these people into these closed communities where they're seeing the same kind of information over and over and over, the same lies. I mean, the Buffalo mass shooter, he had this collage of false statistics about race that had been around on 4chan for like 10 years. It's not just the false information, but the repetition of it. And one of the neo-Nazis that I interviewed, Chris Cantwell, he has spoken publicly about how when he went to prison and then wasn't able to access his propaganda every day, suddenly racism became less important to him. Right? It was like it took going to prison for him to take a gap and like enough space from that to say, maybe this isn't the best way I should be spending my life.
And in your book, you talk about when you were first trying, when you were at Vice News, you had trouble selling the story, pitching the story,
Yeah.
and to really dive in.
At the time, the sort of conventional wisdom, the like smart person take was that these guys were just ironically racism. They were just playing with these ideas. They didn't really mean it, or they're just in their mother's basements, which was often true. And so they would never amount to anything. They would never come together and do anything. But through 2016 and 2017, they started actually stepping out into the real world. They started getting in these big street brawls. And when one of them would land a really good punch against a leftist, that would go extremely viral within these right-wing media ecosystems. And so there was this feeling of buildup, of intensity, and that is what led to them wanting more and more of them wanting to go public, to all meet each other, to be friends with each other, and to fight it out in Charlottesville in 2017.
Micah, you were quite involved in covering the insurrection. In fact, we're pretty much embedded, if you will, with people who were involved with the planning and execution of that day. Do you think, does Kat have it right about how we have to expose these people and get in there and see what's going on?
Yeah, absolutely. It was actually Elle's reporting on Charlottesville, which is fantastic. You could look it up on YouTube. That kind of got me inspired on this beat, so thank you. But Max, what you're referring to is my reporting into a kind of obscure app called Zello, which is a walkie-talkie app. And for about a year leading up to the insurrection, I tracked hundreds of these chat rooms where people would share memes and unlike the kind of ironic racism that we would see on 4chan and some of these pro-Donald Trump forums, is Zello features the human voice. So instead of just seeing, crappy little jokes between people, you're hearing them talk, and people convey very complicated emotions when they get into a chat room and speak together. And what I discovered is that this app had become home to hundreds of militia groups, the very militia groups that ended up storming the Capitol on January 6th. And on that day, I was at home in Brooklyn watching TV as all of this was unfolding, but I was logged into a chat room where a leader of one of the groups, the Oath Keepers, was narrating her path towards the Capitol. With a group of strangers, not knowing that I, a journalist, was there, despite a year of reporting on this platform. I inadvertently recorded a woman named Jessica Watkins saying, we've got a good group, 30 to 40 of us, we're sticking together, we're sticking to the plan. So she used this word plan, which when you're committing a crime is not the smartest thing to do, because it suggests that this was premeditated and not just some, riot where people lost their cool and some bad stuff happened and some windows and doors were broken into, or whatever the kind of narrative that has been spun about that day. And yes, to your point, what I wanted to show was that as these far-right paramilitary groups were presenting themselves as heroes within their communities, protecting their communities from natural disasters, standing up to violent leftists or whatever, they had extreme fantasies about overthrowing the government, committing violence in the street, awful conspiracy theories that were very divorced from reality. And so, yeah, I felt that I definitely heard from some journalism professors who said, you're spreading their messages. And I always thought that was so foolish. I was like, no, we're showing people a dark place on the internet that they would, where real plans that have actual political import are taking place, but we'd have no way of knowing about it otherwise.
It's not just in these dark corners of the internet or the dark web that these things are going on. Kat, when you were at Media Matters for America, and now you continue to do it for places like Mother Jones, just posted a terrific video for People for the American Way that looks at Christian white nationalism. And you basically were paid day in, day out to watch Fox News. So we didn't have to. And one of the things that you did that was, you were very effective in getting to an audience that's not going to watch CNN, that might not be listening to national public radio, on TikTok, YouTube, and different on Twitter. Did you keep your sanity?
Yeah, I feel like my specific team at Media Matters, we were all really close, and I think it's because we all had like the same type of brain worms where you can like ingest so much of this and still not go crazy. The same thing that you two have. I think that the thing about Fox News, though, that like we need to remember is all these things that Elle and Micah were talking about they're like the breeding ground for what will eventually show up on what was Tucker Carlson's show. There was one story he did when he was still on the air about this trans teacher in Canada that misidentified this other person, and that was Tucker's main story of the night. And that started on 4chan. And so I think like the big danger of Fox News is you do have a ton of mis and disinformation. It might not sound as aggressive as the things that you might see on these darker apps or websites, but it shows how far you can go into the mainstream. Because if it's going on Fox News, the most watched cable news channel in the country, that means it's societally acceptable. The Great Replacement Theory, which is a white supremacist conspiracy theory that has inspired many mass shooters, including the Buffalo shooter and the Christchurch shooter, was kind of a fringe right-wing theory for quite a while. And in 2021, which I talk about in my video about white Christian nationalism, Tucker Carlson essentially made it mainstream by calling it out exactly as it's written, saying they're trying to replace us. And after that, it was a deluge of hosts mentioning this. And now our own elected officials are saying this, that the Jews are trying to replace white Christian male, red-blooded Americans with black and brown migrants. This is incredibly dangerous. And it's now mainstream because of the people on those apps, on those sites, in those movements, forcing their rhetoric up from 2014, 2015, 2016 to the point where it can be parroted every single day on the most watched cable news channel in the world, in the country, and on our own House and Senate floors. And that's really scary.
Yeah. Michelle, this is a big week, Media Literacy Week, right? What number is this?
It's 10 if you haven't noticed.
10th annual?
Yes, it is.
We kind of laid the table here, what's going on out there. And you're going into, you're working with educational institutions, promoting media literacy education. If you could, just describe what's most important for the news consumers. We have a lot of students here tonight, group of young journalists from the Ukraine who we were happy to meet with earlier. It's good to see you all. Yeah, what are you all doing so that people can traverse this crazy world where we hear theories that begin in somebody, that are on these what we think are marginal sites, yeah, and then get amplified into the mainstream media and the mainstream political arena.
Yeah, so I think it's interesting, and I say this a lot, that I don't spend time in the places you spend time, right?
Good.
Yeah, and I'm really appreciating that right now. I spend time in the solution space, and I said this to some of our friends that are here, that I'm surrounded by the organizations, the educators, the scholars, the community leaders that are thinking about the solutions, right? What do we do? What do we do about all of this? How do we handle the influx of disinformation? How do we manage the information flow? And the good news is that we have evidence that media literacy interventions work, that media literacy education makes a difference in how we understand our media environments. It makes a difference in how we discern information. It allows us to make healthier decisions and more informed decisions. And we have a lot of evidence for that. And so what is great is that there's a lot of work being done in this space. And one of the biggest differences, so our organization actually started in 1997, which for a lot of people, it's shocking to think, wait, we were talking about media literacy in 1997. That was like late in the game. We've been talking about it for decades and decades. But this year, as the 10th anniversary of Media Literacy Week, if you just look at what has changed in the last 10 years, is we've made incredible progress, right? I said before that in 2016, people didn't even realize that Facebook was getting our data, right? We were like, what is happening? We didn't know this. And now we're having conversations like this a lot. And we are bringing these conversations to our public spaces, to our communities, and to our schools. And so there's incredible progress being made and lots of really, really smart people trying to work on solutions. What can you do every single day? There's lots you can do. And one of them is we have to slow down. We have to slow down. If there is one thing that you take from tonight, it's my request that if you don't know enough about something to share it with knowledge, do not share it. It's as simple as that. You ask yourself, do I know enough about this to feel confident to share it? And odds are you're going to say no. And so don't share it. We have to slow down the space that is so fast and so furious. And we have to be thoughtful and reflective and reflect on our use and on the things that we want to share out there into the world. We have to try our best to slow things down a little bit.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Elle, your book's called Black Pill. Maybe describe that a little. And I wonder too, and there's kind of a second part to this question. Since you've been a real pioneer covering what's going on in the far reaches, in the dark corners of the media landscape, and right now you work for a mainstream news organization, CNN. Has what you see with your organization and others, has the kind of the legacy media, traditional media, have they woken up?
Okay, well, I'll start with the first part.
Okay.
Most of you guys have probably heard of to be red-pilled. It's some variant of adopting far-right politics. The meaning is now kind of obscured, but it really picked up with white nationalists. The idea meaning from the Matrix, you take the red pill and your illusions about reality are shattered. And in their idea, it's that that people are created equal. From there, there are many pills, but one that I think is very important in understanding people's mindset is to be black pilled, which is to have this kind of gleeful nihilism. It's the idea that society is hopelessly corrupt, morally bankrupt. It's going to collapse. And if anything, you should hasten its collapse. You should accelerate it because what will come after is something better. And it's kind of liberating, but it also means you don't have to abide by the morals and ethics that bind all of us into a civil society because the society isn't worth saving. And that kind of mindset is what I think leads people to taking really dramatic action, whether it's Jan 6, Charlottesville. There's all kinds of terrible actions, violent events that have taken place based on this mindset. As for whether like the MSM, as it used to be called, yes and no. Yes, they understand that something serious is happening. And, I see like my colleague Jake Tapper just uses the term 4chan without any explanation of what that is. And I'm like, yes, okay. Like that's a sign, like people understand what it is. But I think that there's a denial that all of us are susceptible to, that this stuff is like really happening, that it really matters. I still encounter the idea that we shouldn't elevate, the fringes. So I had this conversation with a colleague when Laura Loomer, who has promoted some conspiracy theories, and Google her, she was on a plane with Donald Trump going to the presidential debate, and we were talking about should we profile her? And a colleague was like, well, we don't want to elevate her. And it's like, she's on the presidential plane. Like, there's no higher than the space station. She's up there. And there is still, I think, a sense in the mainstream media that like we are the authoritative, like we are the final say. And it's just not true anymore. Like people just we're just right there next to some TikToker. Like we just have to have the humility to accept that. That's the reality.
Yeah. Micah, you're on a weekly show. Actually, it's twice weekly. Newsletter. Anyway, you've done a lot of work in this area. It's almost I think it's indispensable. And I was hoping you could talk about some of the work you've done recently around the election, and also that you did a couple weeks ago about all the kind of disinformation that was really putting lives at risk that came out of the hurricanes.
Sure, yeah. So our show On the Media, check it out. We're maybe the first podcast. I've just realized that I think we were like the first radio show to like actually put our show on an RSS feed, and it was like a technical experiment in the mid 2000s or whenever it happened. So we're still around, still doing media criticism, talking about the internet and current events and stuff like that. We tend to cover the news kind of as a zoomed out way. Like we're looking at how language and narrative frames shape how we understand complex current events. So we do original reporting, but often we're looking at how others are reporting, and we sort of find meaning and patterns in that. Recently, we were looking at the conspiracy theories and disinformation that was spreading after Hurricane Helene. That was really quite awful, and I think to like a lot of people who study this stuff felt like it was worse than it had ever been. That's what I kept hearing. This is so bad. This is getting worse. There's one great writer, Charlie Warzel, who had a piece called "I'm Running Out of Ways to Tell You How Bad This Is," which was really effective. And what he was looking at, and what we talked about on the show, is how websites like X or Twitter have just kind of given up on trying to moderate or encourage good information sharing. And also lots of social media sites are doing this. And one problem is that they if you post an article about what is actually happening in Asheville, as FEMA and public officials and journalists are assessing damage and trying to help people, posts with links are actually sort of stifled by the algorithm. And so what we saw was that people were sharing photos and unsubstantiated claims, and just structurally, those kinds of posts were getting way more attention. I think there was one estimate from a group of researchers that it was getting 30 to 50 times more traffic than posts from FEMA or news organizations. Claims like, for instance, AI photos of a little girl crying as she holds a puppy with the message like, our people are being let down by FEMA. In some cases by public officials who knew this was AI generated, but it felt right. It felt good to post a lie. There was Marjorie Taylor Greene's post about how they're controlling the weather. We never learned who they were, but I think we all know who they are. Again, it just feels good to spread this stuff. There was the claim that Donald Trump had. There was the claim that Kamala Harris was only giving $750 to people in their time of need. Kat, I know that you also were looking at disinformation around the hurricanes.
Yeah, please jump in.
Yeah, I mean, it was insane. It's exactly what Micah said. And this isn't, I think the thing that we need to remember is this is not new. Like, it is worse than it's ever been. We're running out of ways of telling you how bad it is. But Tucker Carlson, for instance, called hurricanes a scam like 2 years ago. I clipped it on my own personal Twitter, maybe 3 years ago. And I was like, he's like, it's a scam, you know. And no, we don't know. But now we do, because everyone thinks this is fake. And, you know, Jewish space lasers, that was a Marjorie Taylor Greene post in 2018. And it's maybe if we had been talking about this earlier, if we had been listening to reporters like Elle and Micah earlier, we could have curbed this at least a little or brought attention to it before we got to the point where we have, you know, millions of people sharing AI generated photos and saying that FEMA has snipers killing people that are trying to get help. That's not true, by the way. It's really disappointing, and I understand, though, how scary it must be. I mean, climate change has gotten so bad, your entire home is destroyed, you feel alone. Our government isn't good at helping people when they need it. And so to have something to turn to be like, that is exacerbating this. That is the reason I don't have my dog that little girl had in the photo. I get it, you know? If you aren't media literate and you're scared and you're angry, it makes sense, if you don't know that bad actors are spreading this in the first place, that you would accidentally spread it too.
Yeah, can I just add something? I think it is really important to remember that part of our challenge is understanding why people believe what they believe. And I think that we have a tendency to kind of criticize, make fun of, laugh off people that believe crazy things. And the truth is there's reasons they believe it. And some of it is fear, some of it is wanting to be part of that group. But also sometimes the story is more interesting, more compelling, and better to understand than the reality. And it's like, if you look at conspiracy theories of the recent past, and you look at like the Sandy Hook hoax theory, you know, it's appalling to me to think that anyone would think that's a hoax, but then you start to think about, it is easier to believe it's a hoax than believe that something that horrible and that evil could happen, right? There are reasons that people are falling for this. There is brain function that makes us believe, and confirmation bias and all of this. And so I do think it would be helpful for us to be trying to understand the human brain and understand our neighbors and people that we could never imagine agreeing with. There's reasons why people believe what they believe, and it isn't just they're uneducated, stupid, crazy. Like, that's usually not the case.
Yeah, that was really, it's made clear in your book, Elle. I want to pivot the conversation for just a second before we go to questions from you all. We have a lot of journalists in this room, young journalists. We have aspiring journalists, people who want to be in the communications field. I guess, start with you, Kat. what would be some advice? Because you're probably, of all of us on the panel, the closest to having been in school. And what would you tell your 20-year-old self about this? And if you're looking to be in this really challenging world.
I mean, I had a very non-traditional career path. I graduated right at the start of the pandemic, and I studied every summer so I could graduate a year early because I was like, I don't want to do any more school. And so I graduated into the pandemic, and I went to the George Washington University in DC, hoping to either be a diplomat or a journalist at a big outlet. And May 2020, I was so disenchanted with our government and large outlets. And so I didn't really know what I wanted to do. And so what I did instead was focus on my principles, my values. And I found a bunch of, progressive job boards, especially focusing on media. There was one I used at the time called Jobs That Are Left. And I saw this opening at Media Matters, and it combined, my favorite things, attacking right-wing, making fun of people who are trying to spread it to vulnerable populations, and, analysis and stuff like that. That was really interesting to me. And I'm very glad that I stuck to that. I think that there's this pressure when you're going into your career that you're like, oh, I need to compromise a bit. And there are jobs and opportunities for you that you don't have to compromise your very principles for. And I think this entire industry would be a lot better if more people did that, because so many people are saying, well, this institution I work for, they did this really irresponsible story, but I want to, get up my career, whatever. You don't have to do that. You can work for institutions that you are proud to be a part of. And if all of us tried a little bit harder at doing that, including myself, I think this landscape, this media landscape, this industry, and our country would be a much better place.
Micah, you want to jump in on that?
Sure. Advice for people trying to wade through this mess of an industry we work in. I would say that don't wait for somebody to give you permission to tell a story that's important to you or to learn about something. Just go for it. I think that when you're on the outside looking in or in the early stages of your career and you see the people you admire, what you see them doing is magic. It's, oh, I could never do that. They're brilliant. I'm nothing. That is an illusion. Everyone, to the extent that there will be an editorial structure when you come up, editors don't necessarily know what they're going to run in 2 weeks, and they are so hungry for ideas. Content is moving faster and faster than ever. We all need to fill time. So pitch, try to become an expert in something small, chase down something you care about, and great things will come.
Elle.
I think it's important to understand why you're special. And if you try to replicate all those other people, you're never going to be as good as they are if you're just trying to be a copy of them. Every success I've had has been because of an obsession that gave me access to knowledge that other people didn't have. My big breakthrough was not Nazis, it was actually gymnastics. I went extremely viral explaining the 2012 gymnastics competition in London in GIFs. And that is how I got attention from bigger and bigger places. That took me to explaining Tumblr. You guys probably don't remember that. The students here don't. But I found these kids who were making $200,000 a month just posting relatable jokes on Tumblr. And that piece got me more and more attention. I've never had a lot of success trying to be the person who explains economic policy. It's only been the things that I understand more than everyone else in the room that have given me success. The trick is convincing other people to listen to you.
I think the three journalists on the panel here, what I know from all of your work is that what comes through and what works is that authenticity. And I know from our friendship, Michelle, that you have a real passion and you're on a mission, and that comes through. And I guess all of you are making some semblance of a living, right?
Yeah, I think so. My husband's here; he would attest to that. I would say that. Can I just say something about journalists in general? So when 2016 was really when media literacy kind of got out of the conversation just in like education spaces and moved into the cultural conversation, and journalists were the most frequent group that reached out to us, and it wasn't to cover us. It was they realized that like, oh my gosh, we need a media literate world because people are losing sight of what journalism is and why it matters. And so I think it's really interesting because there's a complete intersection between media literacy skills and journalism skills. And one of the best ways to become a media literate individual is to take journalism classes, because that process of understanding where to get information and analyzing it and evaluating it is so important. So there's like a really amazing intersection between the two spaces.
You know, we're going to take questions in just a minute. The microphone set up over here. That's one microphone tonight. Thank you. One question per customer. No speechifying. Please, we're giving preference to our student community here tonight. And line up there, and please state your name and what college, university, or other affiliation you have. Okay, so, but before we do, one last question. You know, we've talked about a very, to put maybe the most optimistic word I can think for it, a challenging news environment. I guess just quickly, what gives you some hope?
Can I start?
Sure.
Fascism never wins in the end. I say this a lot, but authoritarianism is antithetical to the human condition. It never wins. It's just a matter of making sure the fewest amount of people get hurt as it's trying to rise. And as far as misinformation and propaganda, if these people knew that, if they were confident that they were winning, that they had support of everyone else, they wouldn't need to lie. And so we have a lot of people who don't want to believe lies. They just don't know they're being lied to. And I think the fact that they need propaganda to succeed, and that they are terrified of people that promote media literacy, of people that, debunk their lies and try to shine a light on what they're doing, the fact that they're scared is a good sign. And it's the one thing that always gives me hope, is just how much these people freak out when you bring attention to what they're doing. You
deal with that some in your book, Elle, about bullies.
Yeah, it's so funny.
I was DMs look like.
Oh my God. I don't know if I can even say. I actually, there's some good stories in the book about that. But I was just listening to this podcast with Jason Calacanis. He has the All In podcast. It's like a Silicon Valley must listen. Billionaires are on it. And this guy, he was complaining about the elites. He's asked, who are the elites? This guy is his friends are billionaires. He's an almost billionaire. He's like, oh yeah, journalists. And we don't make as much money as they do. But I do think it's telling that they understand that we do have power. Obviously, with great power comes great responsibility. But one thing that gave me hope is last year, in Florida, there's been this huge push to ban books. People just get up and read out of context the sex scenes of classics and can get those removed from high school bookshelves. But I went to these school board meetings, and there was massive, massive turnout from people who were opposed to that, from all walks of life, not just the, educated, grad school, liberals, but people from all walks of life who are this is too far. I was kind of nervous about some of that woke stuff, but these people have gone too far in trying to ban books. And I think that speaks to what Kat's talking about. This is not a mainstream idea, but good people do have to take action.
Micah, you look eager to jump in.
I was going to take it somewhere slightly different, although what you two said does bring me hope. which is it's our show on the media. We are part of the legacy news industry, but we also report on it. And it's pretty hard to just write about layoffs after layoffs, cool websites and people you grew up reading and looking up to, out of work, whole sites gone in a day. But one hopeful trend that we've seen are these worker-owned news outlets. So in New York, we have Hellgate. There is a great tech news site called 404 Media. There is a sort of culture and sports site called Defector. There are different versions of this experiment popping up around the internet and around the country. Journalists who are either out of work or are just kind of getting sick of being a part of a dying organization, and they decide to go at it alone or in small groups. And we're seeing these worker-owned outlets become sustainable. We're seeing great original local news and commentary. And it brings me hope that among some very persistent and passionate people in this industry, they are finding a way, despite the feeling that, there is no way.
Michelle? Yeah, sure.
I tend to be very optimistic, so there's lots of things I'm very positive about. I think one of it is, just as I said before, the growth in the media literacy space and the interest in media literacy is just, I can't tell you, I say it all the time, nobody was returning my calls in 2015. Nobody wanted to talk to me. And now, I'm on the stage at the New York Public Library with these incredible people talking about it. And it's in the title of this event. It's like a miracle. And I have to say that I think that there's lots of progress. One point is that, 19 states in our country have passed some sort of legislation to make media literacy part of the educational curriculum. That's just like a little bit of an indication that we're moving in the right direction. And then, I gotta give a shout out to Gen Z, because this is an incredibly thoughtful, creative, caring generation. And Cami was one of my students at Brooklyn College, and she's here now as the director of community for the Center for Communication. So that makes me very positive also.
Great. That's wonderful. I would also say all these news organizations here, and read Ellie's book, check out the resources on themedia.org, their website, subscribe to their newsletter. Same with Michelle's organization, and subscribe to Kat's or TikTok or YouTube channel. And those are really good ways. Those are ways I stay informed. I see an old friend of mine here who has a newsletter called The Writing, writing.com, RIGHTING, that help them out with sometime, that is a daily digest of what's going on in right-wing media, everything from the opinion page of the Wall Street Journal to the Daily Stormer. We got to stay informed and see what's going on out there. All right, we're going to take some questions.
First and foremost, thank you for this conversation. My name is Latrice Davis. I'm a longtime news consumer, former journalist, and this topic is very much in my wheelhouse. My question to the panel is, why has the media, and by extension the masses, have come to embrace and accept the use of euphemisms in daily reporting? Thank you.
Okay. Micah, why don't you take that?
Yeah, I was going to say that.
Do you mind just explaining what you mean by euphemism?
You said to keep the question short.
Following instructions.
Euphemisms like misinformation, disinformation, quote unquote alternative facts, things like that. Why has that come to be embraced, and accepted, throughout the, the uses of, reporting and what have you by the masses and by the media in general? Again, I mentioned earlier that I was a former journalist. and I'm very much a call it like I see it kind of person. So what happened to lies and propaganda? That's my question. Thank you.
All right, I understand. It's true that there's an older school of thought in journalism that you shouldn't use jargon, technical terms, and maybe at one time misinformation and disinformation were technical, coming out of academia, and now we see them all the time. And it is true that sometimes you read something and you're like, that really feels like a lie, but the word lie is just missing. There was a lot of hand-wringing around how to write about Donald Trump for the last 8 years or whatever. And it took news outlets a long time to become comfortable with using the word lie, because lie, when a journalist or a news outlet prints the word lie, what they're saying is that this person intended to misrepresent or to not tell the truth. And there's a sort of very small c conservative approach to news writing where, we're not inside the mind of the subject, so we can't really know their intent. I think we're a little bit beyond that now, and you do see the word lie, but it's used sparingly. I do think that the words misinformation and disinformation are helpful because there are all kinds of falsehoods swirling around all the time, and it's helpful to have at least some ways of classifying them. Misinformation being unintended, or we don't know for sure, and then disinformation, which is this is a lie and it has a political purpose. There's some objective to spreading this falsehood. It's so contextual. It's hard, There is, I guess, a concern that if we newsmakers call everything a lie that feels like a lie all the time, that we're going to maybe turn off some segment of the readership or the listenership. It's help me out here, guys. What do you think?
I think from a media literacy perspective, it's actually really important that those words are in the vernacular and that they're being understood, because that distinction that you just said, mis and disinformation are different things. Disinformation has an intent to deceive. Misinformation can be a post from your aunt, claiming some medicine works for something. That's just false,
So how is this information different from a lie?
What?
What?
Wanna jump in?
Yeah.
How is disinformation different from a lie? Disinformation, it has a political goal, I think this, what really got this in the mainstream was the 2016 election and those stories of Russian messing with Russian interference, exactly. Do you think of, just saying the random Twitter bot that was actually some guy in St. Petersburg just saying he's lying doesn't quite get at it. What he's trying to do is put out a political narrative that causes chaos within the United States.
It's a campaign as opposed to just saying a lie. This is an organized effort, disinformation, as opposed to just one guy's telling a lie. It's worse than a lie.
Much more.
Not that either, exactly, manipulation. Not that either of them are great.
Okay, we're going to take another question here.
Hello, my name is Amira Fagor. I'm a recent graduate of the College of Staten Island, and I'm an intern at the Queer Joy Collective. This question is for Ms. Michelle. I was wondering, what are key points when trying to help someone with the knowledge with media literacy? How would you discuss with a common person, this information is wrong. Here are ways you can not be confused in the future.
How to engage your crazy uncle at Thanksgiving.
Well, yeah, I think would be the first part of the answer would be who are you talking with? Are you talking with a known conspiracy theorist, or are you talking to a friend that just got misinformed or confused about something? I think the most important thing to try to get to have positive interactions with people is to ask questions, to find out from them where they got their information, to talk about where you get your information. I think that if you are really talking to someone who is ingrained in their beliefs and you know that there is nothing you're going to say to them, your goal is not to change their mind. Your goal is to have some kind of positive interaction with them to bring the temperature down a little bit. I think too often we are trying to change people's minds, and the truth of the matter is you are not going to change a conspiracy theorist's mind. That is something that they are going to have to come to while they're in jail, right? Like that's what's going to happen. So you have to know what your purpose is, and your purpose is really to try to have a positive interaction with people. Often, you can also recommend like, oh, I read this really interesting article. I'd be really interested in you reading it, and then we can discuss it. Or offering another, just one outlet. We have a family member, I'm not going to name them here, who is very right wing, and I just said, listen, I'm not going to ask you to stop, watching Fox News, but can you add Reuters to your news diet? Can you just do that for a little bit? And just to like get them thinking differently, and then, having conversations, asking questions is really important.
Okay, we got another question here.
Hi, my name is Preetha. I'm a second year master's student at NYU Steinhardt. I'm also one of the event interns at Center for Communication. So for a young person like me, I get most of my information about the election from memes and a lot of funny Instagram reels. But as creative as they are, I feel like in some ways they also degrade the severity of how much this election matters, especially given that the US elections is one of the most influential elections for around the world. So for the future, or for young content creators like me, how can we keep coming up with creative ways to inform people about how can they vote? What's the election all about? Why does it matter? While also maintaining how important this election is and how severely you can be impacted.
Why don't you take that one?
So for people who don't watch my videos, I try to make them kind of fun. And the reason for that is, I've been doing speech and debate, derogatory, awful, not proud of it, and, stand-up since I was in high school. And the thing that I learned doing Model UN in middle school and speech and debate in middle and high school was the parent judges, because most judges aren't, actually trained people who know what's going on and know the parliamentary procedure. They were not engaged when you just said, this situation is really bad. Let me tell you how much this sucks. Their minds would turn off, and I don't blame them. I mean, how much do you want to hear that? And so when you put in humor, it makes people pay attention. It's the reason a lot of people get their news from late night shows or from, YouTubers and things like that. And so I think that there's a balance to strike there. And I think a lot of people do it really well. And I hope that I'm one of them. And it's punching up is fine. And I think that always helps. And making light of what a screwed up, frustrating world we're in is something we can all relate to. The one thing that I do worry about is just not enough information, not enough context, but I think just properly sourcing things, making sure that, you're following a devastating statistic with but here's a bit of hope or here's a bit of levity. That keeps people more engaged in my experience. And so just remembering to not always be super, super serious. And that was one of the big things the last, 2016 to 2020 is we were always told how awful everything was. And it was. But how much can you hear that as a human being without wanting to blow your brains out? Mm-hmm. And so that, and then also just making sure that you don't always have to be that way. You can be candid, you can be engaged, you can be honest. I have some videos. I did one this week about an abortion statistic that was horrific. It said that, every single day 134 women are impregnated against their will in each of these 14 states without abortion restrictions. And I had no jokes in that one because there's nothing to joke about.
Right.
Just trust your own voice and what you would want to hear then. That's pretty much it. Just whatever you would want to hear, whatever would keep you engaged. I think that's what matters. Does that make sense? Was that helpful at all?
Yeah,
okay,
for
awesome.
sure. Thank you.
Another questioner here.
Hi, my name is Rebecca. There's lots of reasons why I'm here. I'll just say first, I'm Canadian, so really happy to be here. But my question was really around, we hear a lot about how technology has maybe harmed and went against helping us all be more like media literate, but do you have ways that technology can help us become more media literate?
Sure. So technology is awesome. I mean, technology provides us so much convenience and so much opportunity and so much creativity. And I think one of the things that we embrace in the media literacy, like education space, is that create piece. Is that technology allows us to be artists and to be musicians and to be photographers in ways that a regular human being couldn't have been 15 years ago. So I think that there's, my Instagram feed is filled with art. It's just filled with amazing talent all over the world. And so I think we have to remember that yes, there are very dark things happening on the internet, but there's also a lot of beauty and there's a lot of music and there's a lot of art. I always think about my kids are both musicians and they can, in their own room, write a song, produce the song, record the song, release the song without leaving their bedroom, and that's an incredible gift and incredible opportunity. So I think the way that, it's the good and the bad about technology that you can get to so many people. If you have positive things to share with a lot of people, it's a beautiful thing that you can do that on a large scale.
Elle, can you expand on that a little bit? You were talking about how it was GIFs that got you noticed to begin with.
Yeah. I mean, oh, sure. You see the little static pictures that just show one movement over and over again, So like in gymnastics, it's like a full twisting double back. I can like show that over and over again and a person can learn in a way they couldn't learn from text. On a more serious note, but one that matters a lot to me, is people tend to discount the statements, testimony, whatever, of women and Black and brown people. And technology offers proof. So, of course, we see that with the protests around acts of police violence. One you wouldn't associate with that is Roger Ailes, former head of Fox News. He was taken down because Gretchen Carlson wore a wire. So his harassing statements toward her were captured on tape. And just getting things on tape so that they cannot be disputed, so no one could say, oh, you're imagining it, it's in your head. Like, this is very, very powerful. And then just one experience I had when I moved from print to TV was I had this experience over and over again in life, thinking like, wow, that guy was a real jerk to me. Like, that was really sexist. Oh, it must be in my head. I discounted my own experience. Then I go and work in TV and I play back the clip and I'm, oh my God, that was so much worse than I thought. It's actually more sexist. This is more outrageous. And so there's both the proof to society, but also proof to yourself that you could trust your own judgment.
Thank you so much.
Good evening. My name is Daria. I'm a Ukrainian journalist for the English language media outlet, the Ukrainian Review. So you mentioned that authoritarian regimes tend to fall. Well, we hope so. But what we observe nowadays is that Russia invests huge amount of money in foreign propaganda, including the United States. So my question is, in your opinion or your observations, what is the percentage of internal/external propaganda, in relations? And if there is a difference, what is it in the approach to combat it?
Who wants to jump in? Micah, you want to? Elle?
The different, here's how they interact, is that the internal propaganda in the US right now tries to convince you that there is no outside meddling. They call it the Russia hoax now, this idea that Russia was perpetuating and continues to. I found many, many disturbing links between the far right in America and Russia. And not only that wasn't one direction, that was both directions. The far right in America consciously sought out relationships with Russia in the hopes that they could get funding, they could be promoted as a savior of like white civilization.
Tim Pool.
Tim Pool? Oh my God.
Can you elaborate on Mr. Tim Pool, please?
So we have recently found out that some far right influencers, podcasters, creators who are part of this collective of right wing podcasters, influencers, and creators were essentially being completely funded by the Russian government. And it's extremely funny for people like us who have been saying for years, these people are completely funded by the Russian government. And everyone was like, no, they're not, including them, which as far as I could tell, a few of them did not know, which is even funnier. But to answer your question about, authoritarian regimes and internal and external propaganda, our American far right and our media literacy is not a political issue, but it's become one because the American right has gotten so out of control. And so they need misinformation and disinformation to perpetuate their own movements. So that's what the only reasons it's seen kind of as a political issue. And so our far right gets a lot of their cues from authoritarian governments, from Putin, from Orban, from Erdogan. And I think the thing that really hits for me in terms of analyzing the difference is they're sucking up so hard. It's really, really embarrassing. And they don't have the same structure that Putin or Orban has, where they can say all of this and have, a good portion of the media be forced to parrot it necessarily. I think in terms of combating it, the most important thing you can do is have people like you covering it and making sure that there is an enemy to these authoritarian people because they see you as an enemy. And in reality, you're just all of our allies because you're telling us what's true. So thank you.
Take these last two questions here.
Hello, my name is Olena Cook. Now I'm working in communication on a social platform, but I have a background in television journalism. And working in Ukraine, we really care about media literacy, and thank you for raising this topic. When my friends, we are facing really bad, not only escalation of Russian war with the weapons, but also with informational war with information. So some of my friends who don't really know what to share, what not to share, they ask me how we prove it. So I recommend them go to different websites, check from verifying sources. Talking about this, in US, I understand that in Ukraine, we know what's going on more because we live there. But in US, the war, Russian war in Ukraine is far away, and people might be more confusing. And Russia disinformation go to US and influence also a lot. And it, I assume, influence the how audience in US consume and understand what's going on in Ukraine, and it's a very big issue. So my question is, how bad is it? How, for example, how people can check from different sources what's going on in Ukraine and not stuck in with disinformation while checking those sources, because there are a lot of disinformation in the field. So how bad is it in media literacy to battle with those disinformation when it comes to topic about Ukraine? And other question is about discreditation of journalism right now when there are bad influencers who intend to spread disinformation, and often they discredit journalism. How to combat this, and how is it in US, and how we should combat this, because in Ukraine we're facing it as well.
That's an easy one.
Micah, do you want another hard question?
Yeah. I've read a couple really great pieces recently about Russian disinformation and about Ukraine and how they're sort of laundered through prominent voices in the United States. There was actually a great piece earlier this week by a great disinformation reporter, Brandy Zadrozny at NBC, writing about one Kremlin-associated group that seeds stories about alleged fraud on the part of Zelensky using funds that he gets from the U.S. government to buy yachts or villas. And one of the methods they were using was creating fake journalists in Egypt and other places, and having them pretend to be on YouTube like whistleblowers who would say, I was part of the operation to help Zelensky buy this yacht, and this is part of an effort to create hundreds, maybe thousands of these stories. And what we saw is that this claim about the yachts ended up catching on, in part because after people were saying, oh, this fake journalist in Egypt isn't real and this yacht thing is bogus, the Egyptian journalist disappeared. He was killed, and this created like even more coverage about this whistleblower. The fact that he had been killed seemed very suspicious. And it got all the way to the point that J.D. Vance was talking about the yachts on the Steve Bannon's War Room podcast, which is one of the biggest conservative podcasts. It was talked about on the Senate floor, I believe. And so it is quite troubling that you can, in a different, not even in Russia or Ukraine, you could seed some narrative and it would go from a bigger site to a bigger site to a bigger site to the point that you have the vice president nominee repeating it. What's the way that you combat that? Well, I guess studying it. I mean, I think that the best thing to do is just find journalists who cover the region that you like specifically and follow their work closely. It's very easy to fall into being overly critical about news outlets as a whole, but it's nice to find an individual person and get to know them and their work. And one thing that we have worked on the media and a sort of founding ethos of the show is that transparency is the new objectivity. And the idea is that there's this big debate about objectivity in U.S. news, which we don't have to get into. But as Kat said early on, we all have biases as readers, as journalists. And so the idea of transparency is the new objectivity is if you're a journalist and you're allowed to make clear to your audience where you're coming from, what your political worldview is, and then show your audience that you go through great lengths to do fair, rigorous reporting, people can take your political biases with a grain of salt. And they can say, this guy, he's like a liberal, but he does good work. And in my own experience, people have kind of said that to me. They'd be like, I really liked your work on this story. And I know that they are not a typical tote bag NPR listening person. It's complicated because a lot of news outlets, you're supposed to pretend that you're like an automaton or whatever, and you don't have political beliefs and you're independent and all that. But to the extent that you can, it's nice when you can just be real with people and say, like, I'm a human being, but I really try to do a good job when I report something.
I do just want to say about Ukraine, something that might be surprising to those of you who are not from Ukraine in the room, is that when we in the U.S. think about media literacy practice and examples of what's happening globally, Ukraine is a place in which we look at as doing incredible work educating their young people in media literacy education. And part of that is because you've had to fight against Russian propaganda and disinformation your whole lives. But they are doing extraordinary work in Ukraine in educating their citizens.
Thank you. Okay, our final questioner. Hi.
Hello, sorry. Thank you so much for this informative session. My name is Gabriella, and I'm an executive assistant and production assistant at a news network. But as we're days away from the election, we're starting to see polls where candidates are kind of at the same percentages, and sometimes one candidate might actually be winning by a landslide. So what do you think the best media literacy practices are for digesting and evaluating polls?
Can I just say something real quick?
Absolutely.
Yeah, anyone who says they know what's going to happen on November 5th is lying, or they're like way too confident. We are so beyond the point where polls mean like, they're a benchmark, they're something to look at, but to take any of those as gospel is just so arrogant. That's my main thing. Is I for real, it annoys me so much when anyone's like, I know what's gonna happen. No, you don't. None of us do at this point. We are in I'm so tired of saying it, unprecedented times. Someone else say something more substantial.
I think.
Ellie?
Yeah.
I mean, this is not my idea. I've read it elsewhere, but one thought is to think of polls as a kind of like an opinion column, which can be rooted in fact and reporting, but at the heart of it, it is a forecast about what you think the makeup of the electorate will be like and how they're going to vote. And that's a guess. And maybe it's a very educated guess, but it's a guess. And I think anything with numbers in it, we tend to think of as pure hard science, and it's not. So that's how I would think of it.
I just want to say that this might be controversial to the journalists around me, but I think this is the time to slow down on your news intake. Turn off your notifications. I'm going to guess that 90% of the people who can vote in this room know who they're voting for. So there's nothing that you are going to read that's going to change your mind. You want to be informed, but you don't need to know everything that's going on all the time. Like, use your time wisely, check in once a day, listen to On the Media, like, get some information, but like, you don't need to know everything that's going on. Turn your notifications off. Like, it's okay. You don't work for the government. You're not working at the White House. Just chill out.
Whoa, that's the last word. Let's chill out. I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Camilla Vrongo.
Wow, let's give the big round of applause. One more time to our amazing panelists. Thank you, Scott, Michelle, Micah, Elle, and Max. One more round. Thank you again for being here. Thank you all for joining us. Hope to see you next week. Thank you, everyone.